All right. Hey, Quants. Some of the biggest YouTube influencers out there are copying me with AI, and I have proof. Let's get into it. So obviously that was just my hook. I mentioned I was going to throw that in there, and I can't help but provide commentary over all the things that I do. Maybe at some point I'll stop doing that, but at this point I just can't seem to stop doing that. So what I do want to show though is I want to come back to some of the AI stuff that I did earlier where I did that video. That was actually one of my best performing videos of late, where it was my AI workflow and how I use AI in 2026. And so I want to dig into that a little bit more. And I'm going to continue with some of that content because that definitely seems to resonate with people. It could just be the fact that AI is kind of hyped up, and anybody who has a above average level of knowledge with this kind of stuff can get some traction easily with that. So that's my goal, is not necessarily to garner more traction with that necessarily, but I do want to do things that the community thinks is interesting. And so it is going back to that video in for 2026, I wanted to point out a couple of things that I had mentioned. So one thing in particular that I mentioned, and this is kind of the key piece of that whole workflow, was the workflow or the feedback loop that I had been using, and I'm still using it. It hasn't been that long, but I'm still continuing to use that. But after the fact, I did see this video here. And so this video, why this dev ships 100x faster than 99% of engineers. And I don't know this guy. I think he probably has a fairly large following. He's being interviewed on this David Andre's channel. And so I guess he's an engineer. I might after the fact go look at his account and see how large he is. But I've seen a couple of videos, so I think he's kind of picking up some steam under the narrative AI stuff. And so I just wanted to mention he actually is using a loop similar to what I'm using, and it is in the context of Greptile. And I'm not monetized right now, so I'm not worried that I'm going to get demonetized. But I thought it would be useful for me to just share that information. And with that said, I'm going to play this video a little bit. Hopefully I don't get any strikes or anything like that. I mean, that's totally possible because I've never done this kind of thing before. But I'm just going to play a short clip of what he's talking about and how he uses the feedback loop. It's a little bit different than the way that I do it, but we're just going to listen for a little bit. And then once he goes over that, I want to come back and I want to talk about that a little bit. And then I actually have somebody who's even bigger than this guy in terms of followers, also using some of the same strategies that I've been doing. And I want to play just a little bit of what he does, and we'll come back to that. So let's go ahead and listen here.
Is really great for the agents, this being another. So I use open source, I use code structure. I'm going to recommend a specific tool. Like, this isn't me promoting a tool, but like I just
So
use
he's
it
talking about Greptile, which is obviously the main thing I was talking about.
Greptile is for actually a specific skill called grep loop, and this skill will make it feel like you're using auto researcher from Karpathy. I can maybe like explain through an example. I have this PR right here, PR 80. I've done some changes, giving the ability for an agent to like fully ingest every row of a spreadsheet. Greptile gives me these confidence scores, 4 out of 5, 3 out of 5.
Okay, so he's going to be talking about the confidence scores. I mentioned that, and then when you do the feedback loops,
it will give me like the issue.
you end up using those to end up hitting 5 out of 5 is the goal,
I'm not
right?
going to say this is perfect, but from my testing, it's pretty darn good, right? Especially if you're a non-technical person, you need this. Like you need this. So let's say I get a 3 out of 5 score. I'll install the skill. All I do is /grep loop and I hit enter. The agent is going to.
Okay, I'm going to stop right there. And so if you remember in my video, what I talked about doing, and this is my key piece, he ended up so in my setup, what I would do is I would use a GitHub webhook. And so the GitHub webhook goes and hits a service that I have. And I've done this using OpenClaw, for example. And so, well, that's not an example. That's what I actually use is OpenClaw. But you can use Hermes if you want or something like that. I haven't tried it with something like just the Claude Code setup. if they have a way to hook into the environments with their co-work environments and that. So that might be another way to do it. But the point is you have a service that's listening for those webhooks to come in. And as soon as the webhook comes in, it comes in with the information from the PR. And then it parses that information, and then it provides a fix if a fix is necessary. And that's based on the greptile score of being X out of 5, with the goal being to reach 5 out of 5. And so he is talking about the same exact thing. What's different in his approach is he is using this grep loop skill. And so he'll push up a PR, and then he'll manually go, he'll wait for greptile to give him the feedback on what it is. And if it's not a 5 out of 5, then he'll run this grep loop skill to hit 5 out of 5. And so that is different than what I do in the sense that it's a little bit of a manual intervention. What are the benefits of that? So there is definitely some benefits to that. I mentioned the cost associated to running these feedback loops. Since I'm not manually triggering that event, mine will execute every single time. It'll always shoot for 5 out of 5. Every once in a while, that's not exactly what I want. If I just want to push something up because I'm trying to save state, I don't necessarily care about hitting 5 out of 5 because I might be in the middle of some work and I'm just pushing it up to save it. That would be an opportunity or a time when I don't actually want to have it to just charge forward to get 5 out of 5. And so a couple of ways that you can address that in greptile itself is you can go and you can disable greptile. They actually have a greptile config that you can use, and so you can push up a config with your greptile, with your repo that tells greptile to not execute for those runs. So that's another way to handle it. But from a simplicity standpoint, everybody's comfortable with skills, and I think this is actually a really good thing to try out if you want to use those feedback loops. So I wanted to go ahead and share this because I think this would be like a step before you go to where I went, and I just jumped there. I did actually try implementing some skills, and I spent a little bit of time with it. The skill wasn't working the way that I wanted it to work. Also, just from like an engineering perspective, I really like the things to work in a very, I want to say, reactive way, and not, when I say reactive, more in a sense of like a pub sub type of event. So I'm going to publish something, I'm going to have a listener or an observer on the other end, and it's going to react to whatever events that it captures. And so that, if you're using this grep loop, it actually uses polling in the background. And so it will just continue to poll for whatever happens on GitHub, or I think this works with GitLab as well, but it'll just wait. I was looking at the documentation, so it works with GitLab as well. And so it just basically polls for the feedback that's coming back, and then it will give you, and then it will react based on that. And so I don't like polling. It seems inefficient. Now, the reality is I'm probably going to be wrong with how things end up going in the future, because polling is a simplistic method from an agent perspective, and especially people who are not necessarily engineers and don't care about that kind of thing. They just want something that's going to work. Polling is 100% fine. You're going to burn extra CPU doing that kind of thing, but I don't think most people are going to care if they're getting the end result that they want. So they're just going to run with that and let it go. And so I will probably be over optimizing from my approach using webhooks, but who knows? I mean, agents, as they continue to get smarter and evolve, they might, maybe the skills just build in a webhook service that does that automatically, and then it works a little bit more efficiently out of the box. So I wanted to share that piece right there. And then I want to jump over to Theo. If any of you have been watching Theo, he's an excellent follow for staying up to date on YouTube, on AI content in general. He's built an AI application called T3 Chat. I don't get any promotions off of this, but it is my favorite. If I'm just chatting with something, it's my favorite because it actually allows you to check multiple, I believe he's using Open Router behind the hood, which is something that I'm using on another project, a couple of projects actually. And so it allows you to select whatever model you want. And it's only like $8 or $9 a month. So it's way cheaper than all the other models that you're going to get. And so he also is building the T3 codes one. It's actually one of it. He always promotes one of his team members, which I think is kind of a humble and genuine thing to do. And so for T3 Code, which is also the main editor that I've been using, even though I don't think it's necessarily the best for everybody if you're just getting started. In any case, enough of that. This guy has a lot of experience in the short term that he's been building AI stuff. And I say short term, it's only been like maybe a little over a year or two. And so but since he's been in the weeds, he really has a lot of experience with that. And so I don't know. I'll play a little bit of what he has here. It's a little bit different. I will say before I switch topics entirely about how I work with AI, I did want to mention that he does touch on this same feedback loop thing specifically. And one of the things that he mentions in this video is how he ends up going to when he gets PR feedback from like Reptile or CodeRabbit, then he ends up messaging his agent and telling his agent to go look at it and then review it, which was one of the whole premises of the initial feedback loop that I had talked about in my 2026 workflow. And that becomes very painful. And so he either hasn't just got to the point where he's cared to fix that, or he hasn't shared the information with us is how he's kind of created his feedback loops, because he'll put out content regularly about how he's updating that. So anyways, enough about that. He's a good follow, but he's talking about something a little bit different here. And I just want to share that, which is something else that I also do, although we're a little bit different. So I want to listen to him for a little bit just to provide some context in how he's doing it. And then I want to share a distinction of how I'm doing it myself.
I use Shotter. It's great. There's lots of other options that are good too. Get a good screenshot tool. It makes life so much easier. Once I got the HTML in a good state, I found that every plan I did from that point.
Okay, so here's the main content with the plan.
I would just look at the existing one and be like, oh shit, I'm going to copy this formatting. And this is like one of the coolest things is once you get the agent to behave how you want, if there is enough proof of that behavior in your code base, whether that is HTML plans, whether that is your agent's MD steering it certain ways, whether it's the code itself, once you get the model to behave how you want it to, everything else almost stops mattering. And that's one of the cool.
Okay, I'm just going to stop right there. And so I started it a little bit earlier than I wanted to. So his part about the screenshot shutter stuff was not part of the point, but his whole point about once you get the agents to behave the way that you want to, skills and things like that. And this is the other premise. He's just going to continue on with this, but all of that stuff really doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter what skills you're using. It doesn't matter. I mean, the models matter, but you can definitely use a lot of different models more effectively once you kind of get to this level of being able to train the models to do the things that you want to do. And once they have gained that level of knowledge, you don't have to keep prompting them the same things over and over again. And so I wanted to come back to that because that's something that I've identified myself. I never really got deep into using MCPs. I tested them out. I still haven't got that deep into using skills. I've used a number of skills, and there are some platforms like Convex. I use Convex pretty heavily on different projects, and Convex will ship with their own skills, and you'll continually get these prompts to update the skills, which I think is nice because they're there and they're maintained by the team. And so some teams have been doing this where they'll release their skills in a package format and then they continue to update. There are some security concerns about that recently, which is if you're constantly updating things, it used to be the case that you always wanted to update everything to make sure that you were staying secure. And nowadays it's kind of become the case that you really need, which I think again is going almost back to like old school days when I first started programming, is you want to be very cautious about what you update because there could be bugs in there and you're not aware of those bugs. And even if it's been tested thoroughly, there could still be a bug in there. The problem we have now is that we have AI agents wrecking all these open source projects by coming in and figuring out ways to inject bugs into open source projects, and then it gets released and it might get taken down within a few minutes. But if you have the auto update, you've already pulled that in, and then you need to make sure you get the next update. And so you don't know when that's going to happen. And so I will go back to what I think that guy's name was Marty. or Mikey. Let me go back and just look at this video so I get this guy's name right. I'm going to go more. Mickey's. Okay, so Mickey mentioned this, and I think that's a good practice. What he mentioned is give it 2 weeks or before you update everything. And so within a span of 2 weeks, especially as fast as everything's been happening now, that will keep you safe from pulling in everything in. So that was a bit of a tangent on security. Definitely not a full-blown thing, but what I want to do is I wanted to stick on this point of simplicity, which is 100% where I've landed. And I want to continue going fast, right? And so the way that I go fast is I try to get myself out of the way. Agents, and you'll see a lot of people coming out with videos about this recently right now. Agents have gotten really good at just doing things if you could just describe the goal. You don't need to spend a ton of time providing a whole lot of detail. And so you'll see Theo talk about this a lot. There's one area here where I am not 100% sure if we differ that much in this area, but from this video in particular, he does talk about just giving it, I've already trained my AI models, and so they kind of know how I work. They have examples from other projects that I use, which is definitely a huge unlock. So if I already have implemented something in one or more projects, I will point to those individual projects to give it examples. And so I'll say, this is the goal, this is the example, and then go do it basically. And then just give it the freedom to figure out what the right way to do it is. However, before I get to that level, one thing that I still like to do, I don't ever go into planning mode. I used planning mode fairly heavily when it first came out, and I do like the concept of it, but I don't think at this point it's really that valuable. When I write plans, a lot of times if you're using these different tools, when you write a plan, they're gonna write it to some project specific file that is usually a hidden file in whatever, I'm going to call it a Gen 3 editor you're using. And so it'll be under like .cursors, some project, or even .t3, some project. And I don't like to keep my plans hidden that way. I always want my plans to be written into a docs folder. And I think T3 code had that where you could say, move it to a folder in your repository. I don't remember seeing it in the other ones, but I stopped using that in any case. And I just use basically the execution agent, and I'm going to tell it, like, this is what I'm working on. Let's write a plan to the docs folder, and then it'll get there, committed into my repository there, and I don't have to worry about where that's going to be later in the future. It's always right there. And so my point about bringing that up is that I usually will provide a high-level overview of an architectural document when I'm building a project from when I'm starting off with a new project. So when I start off with a new project, I will have a fairly large document describing all the individual features that I want. And I'm not going into a lot of detail. Usually I'll plan, hey, I'll ask the AI, and Theo talks about this in this video, which I think is a good idea. I trust the AI to bring information to me that I might not be aware of, and I'll analyze it. And so that's another thing that he'll talk about here is you actually need to read those plans. I found myself when I was using plan mode, I would actually not read the plans that much, and I would just trust it to go do the thing. And then I'd find out, oh, when I was testing it that, you broke something. And then I'd go back into the plan and I'd see that the plan had written it out. I just didn't bother to read it to that much detail. And so I will spend some additional time really refining a high level architectural document around the project that I want. I won't necessarily go into a lot of details. Once I have that architectural document, then what I do, and I'm happy with it, then that becomes the goal essentially. And again, I haven't used the goal feature that I've seen. Theo talks about that in this video in particular. He mentions that he noticed that the goal feature has been kind of problematic. I'm not sure exactly why I would want to use that for my particular flow, but I'll probably test it out at some point in the future. But I have my high level document, and then what I just tell the AI agent is I say, usually it ends up breaking it down into phases, and I'll say, okay, take those phases, create individual tasks, and do PRs. And so this goes back to my 2026 video where I said I like small testable PRs, and that's exactly what it does. It will create a small testable PR for each one of those tasks. And so these are usually bite-sized chunks that I can go and I can review fairly quickly. And so that way I'm not bottlenecking the AI too much by having a huge amount of review that I want to do. In addition, the feedback loop that I do with Greptile ends up being much faster than if I have a huge project that has to do that Greptile is trying to review. And I've done that before and it works, but it just takes a lot longer for Greptile to review a whole bunch of code and eventually iterate through that to get it right than something small. And so I tend to do that, but I will always prompt to go back, hey, look at the overall architecture when you're implementing these tasks, go implement the task, but don't lose sight of the overall end goal. Because I also have ran into cases where it will get very granular in a task. It'll implement something, and oftentimes it'll implement something kind of ad hoc, and it'll tell me, oh, we're just doing this for right now, and I'll have to go back and I'll say, look, we're not doing any ad hoc stuff right now. The end goal is it's a greenfield project, so there's no users. We're not breaking anything right now, so we're going to do it right from day one. And so that's one thing that I found that I've had to continually prompt. So I'm still working out some finer details on that particular aspect. But all that said, that's probably the one area where I spend a lot of time where I'm not sure if Theo is necessarily doing that. It might just be the case that he's I noticed that he uses the agent MD files a little bit more than I do, and he does that per project, which I think is a great idea. I might kind of steal that and try to use that a little bit. But rather than doing that, I think what I've ultimately ended up with is the architectural document. So I think they can't, well, I won't say this are the same purposes, because the way that he describes the agent MD is more of like contextual information about how he wants it to work and the references that it wants it to have versus like, this is the plan, right? So I just wanted to bring a follow-up to that, and then a little teaser at the end. Part of this was a precursor to another video that I'm going to do. And so one thing I think in the next video, AI related, that I do, I'm going to talk, I had in the 2026 video, I did mention using, I kind of classified, and the idea I mentioned before came from Theo. And so I think it was a useful way to classify your editors or your IDEs. You had Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3, and we're all on Gen 3. And so in my next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Click Alchemy, which I've shared that before on the channel multiple times. It's what I use to create my own thumbnails and titles. And I'm going to add a feature to that. And so I won't say what the feature is right now, but it's going to be a super useful feature, I believe. And I'm going to do that 3 separate times. And so it'll probably be a pretty long video because I don't like to edit. And so I'm just going to do these long run videos like I do. And I'm going to use T3 code. I'm going to use Glass, Cursor Glass, and then I'm going to use Codex. And so I will be on a different recording platform when I do that as well, because that Codex right now requires Mac. And so I'm going to have to set up a Mac to be able to demonstrate that with Codex. But Theo was talking about that. I don't think it was in this video. I think it was in his previous video where he was comparing some different models about how good Codex is. And I used it a little bit, but I haven't used that much. And so I'm going to give it a little bit more of a spin just to see how I like it. And I will do that in the same context of comparing basically these 3 Gen 3 editors and how I use them. So this will be a little bit more detail, and this will be a real world example of me implementing a real feature. And when this feature comes out, it's going to be live. And so if you guys are interested in trying out Click Alchemy and testing out this feature after I implement it, then you'll be able to do all that. And so just a teaser on that. And I'll put the links to both of these videos because I thought they were good content, and hopefully that's going to cover me in terms of references for the content that I shared here and providing proper attribution and not getting a strike on YouTube, since most of this was my commentary and just the correlations that I wanted to share here. Both of these guys, obviously, they sound like they know what they're doing, but obviously we're all doing a little bit different. And I just wanted to highlight kind of the differences that I do versus some of these guys that are obviously a lot more popular than me. And so, yeah, if you guys like that one, you know the drill, subscribe, like, all that kind of stuff. And I'd appreciate it. And stay tuned for the upcoming AI video where I do the comparison against the 3 Gen editors in a real world scenario. And then again, if Click Alchemy, you'll be able to actually use that feature for real if you're interested in that. And we will catch you on the next one. Peace, quants.